What do Mattel, Banana Republic, ButcherBox, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet that also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. And that's no industry secret. That's Shopify. Learn more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Feel your max with Brooks Running and the all-new Ghost Max 2. They're the shoes you deserve, designed to streamline your stride and help protect your body. Treat yourself to feel-good landings on an ultra-high stack of super comfy nitrogen-infused cushion that takes the edge off every step, every day. The Brooks Ghost Max 2. You know, technically, they're a form of self-care. Brooks, let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
November is getting close, and that means that the election is right around the corner. For quality coverage of all aspects of the election and expert analysis on top stories from around the world, there's no better place than the DSR Network. Members of the DSR Network get exclusive access to members-only segments of our podcasts, an ad-free listening experience, and access to our Slack and Discord communities where you can connect with fellow members and us. For the month of September, use code SNARK for 30% off your subscription at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code SNARK at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Now please enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. In an unhinged rant on social media over the weekend, Donald Trump made some of his most expansive and specific threats yet to prosecute and jail his political enemies if he wins the presidency. He also flatly declared at a rally in Wisconsin that his plan for mass removals of migrants will be bloody. All this comes as new polls show that the race is very, very tight. So what does it mean that, for now at least, Trump doesn't seem to be paying a political price for running on overt and increasingly explicit threats of authoritarian rule? Today we're discussing this with one of our favorite guests, A.B. Stoddard, a columnist for The Bulwark, who has been really good on the need to face up to what Trump has been telling us about what he would actually do in a second term. Great to have you back on, A.B.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
So in his screed on Truth Social, Trump once again lied that he was cheated in the 2020 election and said that when he wins this time, those who try to cheat will be prosecuted and face long-term prison sentences. He said this will extend to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt elections officials. AB, I think part of this is an effort to gin up his people for violence if he loses. I mean, this may be the most specific he's been in threatening prosecutions against his enemies. We're truly talking about a threat of mass persecution here, aren't we?
Oh, there's no question that if he could, he would. But I think you're right that this is sort of a call to action, right? He's worried about the polls. He's worried about the state of the race. And it's a way of telling his supporters that the cheating is already underway. As a president, he believes he can rule like a dictator, but he also is preparing his people that this election might not be called for him, and that would be cheating. There are Republicans who have been fully radicalized since 2020 at the ground level who intend to delay at the county level the certification of the election. It's this really, really a dangerous plan that is afoot. They want to come up with ways as county canvassers to avoid certifying the election in the days following November 5, which is a perfunctory and ministerial and non-discretionary duty of theirs. All of the questions about ballots and stuff like that come later, right? So we know that there's this army of people ready to if they see anything that looks like it's going Harris's way, to step in. And so this tweet, this Truth Social message, I think is, more of a call to arms even though he knows these people are out there and that they're making plans to find ways to cause delays at the very start of this process, I think that he's feeling panicked. And so that's why he's issuing this sort of call to arms.
It really is a message to all his supporters and, as you say, at the state level, to officials to gear up to do whatever it takes to delegitimize votes in places where he isn't winning. At his rally in Wisconsin, meanwhile, Trump talked about his plans for mass deportations, which include setting up giant detention camps and potentially using the military. Listen to this, courtesy of Aaron Rupar.
And, getting them out will be a bloody story. Should have never been allowed to come into our country. Nobody checked them. Nobody checked. Were they criminals? Were they from jails? We have them pouring out from jails. We have the worst criminals in all of these countries.
That is a threat of mass bloodshed. In addition to this, I want to point out that Stephen Miller has explicitly described the coming mass removals under a second Trump presidency as spectacular. He's promised that they will be spectacular. AB, I think this is deliberate. They're telling their base to get excited now about the bloodbath and brutality and violence that is coming if they vote for him. Am I overreading that?
No, it's so interesting that Trump both benefits from energizing his supporters about this. And we saw at the Republican National Convention, the signs in the crowd, instead of, saying USA like they did at the DNC, said mass deportations.
Now, mass deportations now.
Right, mass deportations now. So the use of the word spectacular is so interesting because they want images of roundups to be dramatic and brutal and punitive in order to show that they are controlling the border and decreasing immigration overall. Greg, you're a thoughtful person who is very steeped in policy, and you are aware that it is really very difficult to imagine Donald Trump being able in a second term to actually get 15 million people out of here to other countries that would take them. And so he intends to use the roundups as a deterrent and a way to show the voters that he's done something about it, even if he doesn't get an actual wall and doesn't, really manage the border in a productive and healthy way and create a new immigration system that makes sense for us, which he's not interested in at all. But the spectacle is something that he knows his base very much craves. And for it to be punitive and cruel. And he even mentioned weeks ago, remember, he said something about there will be a beautiful mother and children, it'll be rough stuff or whatever. I can't remember the exact words. And so he both benefits from this, and then swing voters and undecided voters and people who are not too politically engaged, when this breaks through, they say, he just loves to talk a big game. He's a showman. He's not really going to do that. And so I believe he's both energizing his core base while not paying an electoral price among people who could decide this election at the margins because they don't actually believe it'll happen.
To your point, we have a new New York Times Siena poll putting Trump up one nationally among likely voters, 48 to 47. Now, I don't think anyone should freak out about that. It's a very close race. We've known that all along. But I want to highlight this. 54% of likely voters say Trump is a risky choice, yet 52% say Kamala Harris is a risky choice. That's basically a wash. I mean, I think it's clear that a lot of voters simply aren't quite aware of what Trump is threatening to do if he's elected again. How did that happen, and what does it mean?
I think it's very discouraging after the Democrats have done such a good job of making sure that Project 2025 broke through to the electorate at a broad level and scale over the summers, right? So like 9 months ago, no one knows what this is, except for people like you and me. It's very disturbing. And I wondered how they would ever get something so kind of difficult to translate, not so tangible the way abortion is. Like, how would they message this to voters, right? And they have. really successfully. Yet voters continue to see, and we see this in this New York Times Siena poll, Trump as to the left of his party, to the center of MAGA extremists, of these other candidates who are running in Senate races, for example, and faring poorly, just like they did in 2022, that he's seen as some kind of non-extreme moderate. The other concern for me in the poll is he's seen as like the agent of change and not Harris. So these are troubling signs as we head into the final weeks. She has room to grow in this poll simply because the voters are complaining in the poll that they don't know what she stands for. So if she focuses her efforts to get out there and be more emphatic, but also I think just be more present. Trump is everywhere, right? Even though I just said not a lot of this doesn't break through, he's finding pockets of voters to reach and target. If he's on a weirdo podcast that only like 18-year-old incels listen to, males of all races who don't leave the house, I'm being serious. That's going to help them on the margins, right? Young males are turning away from the Democratic Party. So that is, I think the alarm bell from the poll is that he continues because he tries to dodge things like Project 2025 and abortion. And he's so explicit about abandoning the pro-life community that people think, he's not really going to be that way. He just sort of talks a big game. But that's something that the Democrats have to really focus their resources on and their messaging on, I think, is to try to... People don't care, Greg, that Trump is a liar. They don't care that he's an authoritarian. It frightens you and me. We know it's real. We know what a Trump second term could do, but voters blow it off. These least engaged politically engaged voters who could decide the election. It's very important to try to message what his extremist plans are in the time that we have left, and to make sure voters know what Harris stands for.
What do Mattel, Banana Republic, ButcherBox, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet that also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. And that's no industry secret. That's Shopify. Learn more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Well, yeah, on your point about Project 2025, another number here from the New York Times Siena poll is that 3/4 of likely voters say they've heard about it, and of those, 63% oppose it. As you say, Democrats have really managed to break this through Project 2025, to the broader culture, which is a real achievement. It gets talked about on talk shows and so forth, and it's really out there in the world of people who don't pay close attention to politics. But again, to your point, it doesn't seem as if voters have internalized the idea that this is really a blueprint of some very frightening stuff, really authoritarian stuff across the board. What can be done about that? He codes as moderate for a lot of people on abortion, and he codes as moderate relative to Republicans generally. Is there some way at all for Democrats to communicate the fact that he's threatening to do all kinds of things that, if voters really understood it, mass jailing of opponents, giant deportation camps, bloody deportations, if voters understood that, they would certainly be appalled by it. Is there a way to communicate it?
Right. Well, I'm not that messenger, but the parts of Project 2025, when I give presentations to groups that I lead with, pardoning January 6th rioters, and then move into the mass firing of 54,000 people, replacing them with political appointees who would be pre-pardoned, likely to carry out illegal and unconstitutional acts, and to try to show that when you change the government into a bunch of yes men who are working only for Donald Trump's whims, now that they've seen January 6th, 2021, I think there's a way to show the voters what that would mean. I think there's also a way to get explicit about mass deportation or mass roundups that could be very, very disturbing and very bloody and violent. And what would that feel like in your community? And so they're going to have to try to paint a picture of that. I think they often go to stuff like, they're going to get rid of the Department of Education. They're going to attack public schools. This will affect your whatever. That kitchen table stuff is important, but I think their real kind of dystopian, dramatic, and dark stuff in Project 2025 has to be messaged as well. Like, women shouldn't have chemotherapy because it might affect their ability to reproduce, even if they have cancer. I mean, there are things in there that you can do in your advertising, I think, that are galvanizing, and they're important people, but important for swing voters who are not reading a lot of news to understand.
There is one ad from the Harris campaign that's very forceful on this point. I just don't know how much money is behind it, and I think that might be something to track down now that we're seeing the failure of some of the stuff to break through. Let's listen to something else now. This is North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, a Republican, on NBC on Sunday, responding to Trump's threat.
Do you think that it is appropriate to be threatening election workers in this way before the election?
Well, I think it speaks to a concern that Americans have, and as we've talked about on this program before, we don't just have one election in this country. We've got elections that go across over 3,000 counties, and many of those counties have different rules. And so, again, I think what President Trump is saying, we're going to have, if we have free and fair elections, everybody's got to follow the rules.
So Republicans are just fine with Trump's most explicit authoritarian threat yet of mass prosecutions of political opponents, including public servants. That's appalling on its own terms, but beyond that, if GOP elites would condemn this stuff instead of helping sanitize it when it gets before a mainstream audience, what Trump is actually threatening to do would probably break through to more voters, wouldn't it?
Of course. Look, 4 years ago, we had people that would say, oh, now, that's not going to happen in this country. I don't approve of that. That's not going to happen. That's not allowed. The former president knows that. Instead, the idea that they are saying, well, we need to make sure that we have election integrity. We need to make sure that people follow the rules. That's all he wants is a free and fair election. And now, as you said, sort of normalize it this is the difference of the last few years. The Republican Party decided after the base voters accepted January 6th and he survived it politically, it would become a different cult/party than it was even in 2020. And so if I were to call members like formerly normal, still only normal and private members of Congress, Republican members of Congress right now, and say, hey guys, we haven't talked in a while. You know what I think, what I'm writing over at the Bulwark, it's 8 weeks to Election Day. Really, if he tries to burn the country down and Harris clearly won, are you going to edge out on the line and condemn and disavow? They would say, everything's going to be fine. We're going to just make sure we've spent all this money through the Republican National Committee to make sure that everyone in these state legislatures are following the rules and that election officials don't change them like they did during COVID. And we're going to make sure that everything is on the up and up. That's what they would say, exactly what Doug Burgum is saying, which is we're just trying to really make sure we're going to be meticulous and thorough and have really safe and fair elections. And when Trump is asked, are you going to accept the results? He says, only if they're fair. And so every Republican now got their talking points that they have to say only if it's fair. And it's only fair if he wins.
So I think you're getting at something really dark here.
This is what you have me on for, Greg.
This is true. That is absolutely true. That is why we have you on and why we like you so much as a guest. We like it. We like it dark here. So no, seriously. So to your point about the base accepting January 6th, and I would add actually turning it into a touchstone moment of heroism for the MAGA movement. After January 6th, a lot of these Republicans in Congress were really quite frightened. Kevin McCarthy, he was then the minority leader, House minority leader, became Speaker after 2022. He had rioters breaking into his office. He was on the phone with Trump screaming for help. He didn't want to be killed by Trump supporters, right? And then a few weeks later, he made his pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago, and that sort of set the Republican Party on this fateful course to this new place where January 6th rioters were patriots and heroes who, with absolutely legitimate underlying grievances and so forth. But if I understand you correctly, what you're basically saying is that once the party made this mass decision, it's essentially all there for Trump, no matter what he does at this point, right?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, looking back in those weeks, so Kevin McCarthy goes to Mar-a-Lago maybe on February 1 or 2 or 3. So it's less than a month after January 6th when he, as you said, pleaded with Trump to stop the rioters and to issue something on Twitter that was emphatic. And Trump, as we know from the reporting, famously said to him, well, I guess they're more upset about the outcome of the election than you are, Kevin. And so he's there in one of the first days of February, and then Mitch McConnell on February 13th, 2021, days after Kevin goes to Mar-a-Lago, refuses to round up enough votes to convict Trump in the Senate trial about inciting the insurrection on January 6th. He delayed the trial till he wasn't president so that they could say he's no longer president. And you don't convict a president who's not a president anymore, so that they had an out, so that they wouldn't have to get rid of him. So Mitch McConnell famously gives the speech on the floor where he says he's morally and practically responsible for January 6th, and he would be taken care of by our criminal justice system. And he refuses to cut off Trump's path back to power by convicting him in a Senate trial. So at that point, Trump owns them for the rest of his life, because even if he loses his election, Greg, he will be the nominee in 2028 in the Republican Party. They will all have to say it was stolen, and no one's going to break with Trump if Kamala has a nice 4-point win, okay? That's not happening. So the party is completely his, so much more in a way than it was before. And they there's no post-Trump, right? No one is saying... No one goes on these shows anymore and says, well, I am actually for free trade. This is where I differ with the president. Or, we believe that we have to reform entitlements. I mean, you know that. It's all the policy differences are gone. And now they have to, on this threat of, really frightening days and weeks after the election, potential violence, intimidation. We don't even really know what. In the face of this, having seen what he did last time, no Republican will go on TV and say, we want an orderly process, free and fair elections are the hallmark of our democracy. They were protected last time. They'll be protected this time. They're decentralized around the country. Honest, good people are working hard to manage these elections, and they will be safe. No one will say that.
That is such a crucial point. They are helping him delegitimize our entire system. A.B. Stoddard, thanks so much for coming on with us. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Greg. Thanks.
Folks, make sure to check out some very good new content we have up at TNR.com. Jason Lincoln's taking a close look at Trump's diabolical plan for the federal workforce, and Kate Aronoff asking an awfully good question. Why is the New York Times inviting Project 2025's architect to a Climate Ideas event? We'll see you all tomorrow. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.